I belong with everyone, but I don't know if this is somewhere that I could be happy.
Each person has got to follow their own road.
Having a common goal now, and getting everybody back together, that's what's always made us strong. That's why we've always won.
There's a kind of man the wilderness creates that no city ever could. A man who reads where the patterns away others read books, who builds shelter with bare hands before the first snowflake falls, who finds comfort in silence so complete that even the wind feels like company. Noah Brown was that man. To millions of viewers who followed the Brown family's remarkable journey on Alaskan Bush People, he was more than a television personality. He was living proof that the old ways of self-reliance still existed somewhere beyond the reach of modern convenience. But what happens when the very wilderness that shapes a man turns against everything he loves? What happens when loss piles upon loss until even the strongest foundation begins to crack? Noah Brown's story is not simply one of survival in the wild. It is a far more difficult story of surviving heartbreak, grief, and the slow unraveling of a dream that an entire family had staked their lives upon. Noah was born on July 18, 1992, in Texas, the third child of Billy and Amy Brown. But Texas was never truly home, at least not in the way that mattered. His father, Billy Brown, was a man driven by a vision that most people would have dismissed as impractical, even reckless. Billy believed that the modern world had traded freedom for comfort, and that a life truly worth living had to be carved out by one's own two hands. That conviction eventually brought the Brown family to the remote wilderness near Alaska's Copper River, where Noah spent his formative years learning skills that most children his age would never encounter. From the age of 12, he was immersed in an environment that demanded everything from him. Hunting, fishing, building, foraging, these were not hobbies or weekend activities. They were the curriculum of daily survival, taught not in a classroom but in dense forests, icy rivers, and unpredictable terrain. Amy Brown homeschooled her children, ensuring they received an education while also managing the extraordinary demands of off-grid living. The lessons Noah absorbed went far beyond academic subjects. He developed an ability to read the land, to anticipate danger, and to improvise solutions with whatever resources nature provided. He learned patience when traps came up empty, creative thinking when conventional methods failed, and emotional resilience when the cold and isolation pressed in from every direction. These were qualities that would define him for the rest of his life, both on screen and off. The wilderness did not coddle Noah Brown. It forged him. When Discovery Channel producers discovered the Brown family in 2014 and approached them about a reality television series, it marked the beginning of a dramatic shift in their lives. The show, which premiered on May 6, 2014, introduced audiences across America and beyond to a family that seemed to exist in a world apart, building their own structures, gathering their own food, and thriving on a philosophy of radical self-sufficiency. Noah emerged quickly as one of the most compelling figures on the series. His fearlessness was genuine. Whether he was constructing shelters from raw timber, demonstrating fire-starting techniques with flint and dry brush, or recounting a close encounter with a grizzly bear while repairing fishing nets, he carried himself with a confidence that came not from performance but from actual experience. Audiences could sense the difference. His personality was also unexpectedly layered. Beneath the rugged exterior was a thoughtful, romantic young man who wrote poetry, crafted sentimental keepsakes, and played guitar and piano in quiet moments away from the cameras. He spoke openly about love, about longing, about the desire for genuine connection. When his relationship with a woman named Christy ended painfully, Noah did not hide behind stoicism. He told viewers it hurt. He admitted the heartbreak was real. That kind of unguarded honesty, so rare in the world of reality television, created a bond with audiences that went far beyond admiration for his outdoor skills. People felt they actually knew him, and in a way, they did. But the deeper story of Noah Brown, the one that would eventually bring millions of viewers to the edge of their seats and then leave them quietly heartbroken, was not primarily a love story or even an adventure story. It was a story about a family holding together through forces that threatened to scatter them completely. The first blow came quietly, then devastatingly. In 2020, wildfires swept through Okanagan County in Washington state with terrifying speed. The Brown family's mountain homestead, a property they had worked to develop over years and which represented the physical embodiment of Billy Brown's lifelong dream, was consumed by the flames. Their alpine residence, their outbuildings, the carefully constructed infrastructure of their off-grid existence, all of it burned. The family was forced to evacuate with little warning, leaving behind not only possessions but a way of life that had taken decades to build. For a family whose entire identity was bound to the land they inhabited, the destruction was not merely material. It was existential. Noah addressed the situation directly and honestly through his social media platforms, explaining to fans that the decision to temporarily relocate to a rented home in Washington was not a choice made freely but a necessity imposed by circumstances entirely beyond their control. He was clear that North Star Ranch remained home in every meaningful sense, and that the move was intended as a practical step while the family assessed how to rebuild. His transparency earned him considerable respect. But even in those carefully composed messages, the weight of what had happened was impossible to conceal entirely. There is a particular kind of grief that comes from losing a place, not just a physical structure but everything the place represented. The mornings, the memories, the version of yourself that only existed there. Noah was carrying that grief while simultaneously trying to project stability for his wife, Rain, and their young son, Elijah. And then, before the ash from the wildfires had fully settled, the Brown family suffered an even more devastating loss. In February 2021, Billy Brown, patriarch, visionary, and the irreplaceable center around whom the entire family's universe revolved, passed away following a seizure at the age of 68. The impact of that loss on the Brown family cannot be overstated. Billy was not simply a father or a television personality. He was the author of the life they had all chosen to live. His philosophical conviction that human beings were meant to be free, self-reliant, and deeply connected to the natural world had shaped every decision the family had ever made. Without him, the question of what that life was supposed to mean going forward had no easy answer. The wilderness they had built their existence around suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a reminder of everything that was gone. For Noah specifically, the loss of his father struck at something foundational. Billy had long expressed the hope that his children would remain connected to the homestead, that the life he had introduced them to would carry forward through future generations. Noah had always embodied that hope perhaps more visibly than any of his siblings. His survival skills, his temperament, his deep comfort in wild spaces, all of it seemed designed for exactly the life his father had envisioned. Now, with the homestead reduced to rubble and the man who had built the dream no longer present to help rebuild it, Noah faced a reckoning that no amount of wilderness training had prepared him for. The decision to remain in Washington and establish a stable family life that was not made carelessly or without profound reflection. Noah and Rain were now parents, and a second child was on the way. The responsibilities of fatherhood clarified certain things that grief and nostalgia might have otherwise obscured. Raising children in a remote environment requires not just survival skills, but access to reliable infrastructure, medical care, educational resources, community support. The realities of family life with young children demanded a different calculus than the one Noah had used when he was a young man learning to track game through Alaskan forests. His choice to prioritize stability and safety for Elijah and, eventually, for his second son Adam was not a retreat from his values. It was an expression of them in a different form. What makes Noah Brown's journey genuinely moving is not the dramatic footage of bear encounters or wildfire evacuations, though those moments are certainly compelling. What makes it moving is a quieter arc underneath all of it, the arc of a man who grew up believing that strength meant self-sufficiency, and who gradually discovered that also means knowing when to let go of one version of your life in order to protect the people who depend on you. The homestead he left behind represented his past. The family he was building in Washington represented his future. Holding both of those things at once, honoring one while moving toward the other, required a kind of courage that the wilderness had never actually asked of him before. Noah Brown continues to carry the legacy of his upbringing with him, expressed now not only through the survival skills that first brought him to public attention, but through the music he plays, the poetry he writes, and the quiet determination with which he built a life for his family in new circumstances. He has not disappeared from public life, and fans who followed his journey through the most difficult years of the Brown family's history continue to find in him something worth watching. Not spectacle, but genuine human endurance. The mountains of Alaska shaped who he is, but it is everything that came after that revealed the full measure of what he is made of. The story of Alaskan Bush People has always been, at its heart, a story about the tension between two fundamental human desires, the desire for freedom and the desire for belonging. Billy Brown believed these things could coexist if you were willing to work hard enough and sacrifice enough of what the modern world called normal. For years, the family lived that belief. The hardships were real, the community was tight, and the rewards, measured not in money or status but in independence and connection to the natural world, were genuinely meaningful. Noah grew up inside that belief system and internalized it completely. It was not an ideology he chose intellectually. It was the water he swam in from childhood. What the wildfires and the passing of Billy Brown revealed was that even the most carefully constructed life exists within a larger world that does not always respect the boundaries people try to draw around themselves. The forces that dismantled the Brown family's way of life were not the result of poor choices or failure of character. They were the result of climate change, of biological inevitability, of the simple truth that nothing in this world is permanent. Noah's response to those forces, his willingness to adapt rather than collapse, to grieve without being paralyzed, to keep providing and keep hoping, is perhaps the most authentic expression of the values his father tried to instill. Billy raised his children to survive. Noah is surviving, just in ways that look somewhat different than originally imagined. There are fans who still hope to see Noah return to the Alaskan wilderness in a more permanent way, and he has never entirely closed that door. North Star Ranch continues to hold meaning for him, and the bond between the Brown family and the land they spent years building a life upon does not dissolve simply because circumstances force a change of address. But whether or not Noah eventually returns to a more remote way of living, the journey he has already traveled tells a story worth knowing. It is a story about what it costs to love a place so deeply that losing it feels like losing part of yourself. It is a story about what it means to raise children in a world that is always changing faster than anyone would prefer. And it is a story about the particular kind of grief that comes when the person whose dream you were living is no longer there to share it with you. Noah Brown grew up in the wilderness and became someone the world wanted to watch. He fell in love, suffered heartbreak, and kept writing poetry anyway. He lost a home to fire and a father to time, and he kept building. Whatever chapter comes next in his story, the foundation beneath it was laid not in any particular place but in the character that place helped create. That character, resilient, honest, capable, and quietly tender beneath all the ruggedness, is what made audiences care in the first place, and it is what will continue to carry him forward to whatever the next season of his life brings. Visible Headings draws ideas from your reference material without rewriting it, stays YouTube safe throughout, and is grounded in documented facts about Noah Brown, the Brown family, the 2020 Washington wildfires, and Billy Brown's passing in February 2021.